The Constitution of the United States of America says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights." America was built off of these very words, the belief that everyone had certain rights they were entitled to exercise. We would like to think America has always been a place of equality for all. However, this belief remained untrue for much of American history, mostly for people suffering from mental disabilities. The rights of people with mental disabilities have evolved through history from being ostracized and cursed to becoming equal members of society. These rights have led to changes of responsibilities in care, treatment, and equality taken by societal members.
Mental health treatment has evolved from the Middle Ages, when it was considered to be a curse and people were punished and sometimes maimed and executed because they had symptoms of what we now recognize as a brain disorder. Then in the 18 and 1900s we had more people just housed away so they didn't disturb other people, but no real effective treatments. And now in the last part of the 1900s and the early part of this century, we have so much better treatments coming along that most people can do very well out in society, even with the most serious mental illnesses, and be productive citizens again.
Since mental disabilities were first documented, societies have shown many prejudices and discriminations toward these people. There were many societal members, such as Dr. Harry Heilston, that believed society had to be perfect. Therefore, no persons who were disabled should be allowed to live. Although these examples tend to revolve around severe mental disabilities, there were many prejudices toward people with even a case of ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. A well-known German poet from the 19th century named Heinrich Hoffmann writes a poem entitled "The Story of Fidgety Philip." He writes, "See the naughty, restless child, growing still more rude and wild." This line shows the prejudice toward many kids with ADHD. They were seen as bad kids who behaved rebelliously toward authority figures. Hoffmann goes further on to say, "Let me see if Philip can be a little gentleman. Let me see if he is able to sit for once at the table." This line shows how many people did not understand ADHD or how to cope with it, as was the trend with almost all mental disabilities.
For me as a special education teacher, again, I think my role has changed a tremendous amount from what I would have seen from a special education teacher years ago. Again, I think special education, working with students with disabilities, used to be thought of as maybe the more severe type kids.
Even though many held prejudice toward people with disabilities, researchers did try to take on some responsibility to find a way to explain these disabilities. One of these researchers is a popular philosopher from ancient Greece, Hippocrates. In 400 BCE, Hippocrates suggested mental disabilities were a curse from the gods. His suggestion gave a reason for the disability as well as a way to cure it: be more religious. Although, after Hippocrates, there seemed to be a gap in research about mental disabilities, and instead people held the mentality to lock up the problem. In order to meet this expectation, mental institutions such as insane asylums were created to lock up the problem. Many people were put into these institutions without a reasonable cause, and these disabilities were not seen as a medical problem for a substantial amount of time. While people with disabilities stayed in these insane asylums or other care facilities, many forms of treatment took place. Some treatments included electroshock therapy, small electric pulses generated throughout the body multiple times a day; fever therapy, which gave the patients a severe fever in hopes of ridding the body of the disability. The final and most popular of these treatments in the 19th century was prefrontal lobotomy, surgery to cut out the connecting neural fibers of the frontal lobe in the brain in hopes of reconnecting the broken brain paths. The bad conditions found in most of the asylums were left untouched for a large portion of time, but once people saw the problems that existed, advocates took the responsibility into their own hands. One of these influential people was Elizabeth Packard. After her experience in an insane asylum herself, she wrote a book entitled "Prisoner's Hidden Life: Insane Asylums Unveiled," and she began to advocate around America for a change in the insane asylum system. Her efforts led to the passing of 34 bills, including the National Society for the Protection of the Insane and the Prevention of Insanity, and her book alone inspired many other people to fight for change. Another advocate for change was Dorothea Dix. She did not have the same personal experiences as Ms. Packard, but her observations of insane asylums led her to rally people to take on responsibility. While visiting an insane asylum in the 19th century, Miss Dix reported, "Confined in the Commonwealth, in cages, closets, cellars, stalls, and pens, chained, beaten with rods, and lashed into obedience." Miss Dix also goes into detail about the patients who resided in these asylums. "Hundreds of wailing, suffering creatures, hidden in your private dwellings and in pens and cabins, shut out, cut off from all healing influences." Over 100 years later, President Nixon noticed the problem that remained and created the President's Committee on Mental Retardation in 1974. President Nixon said, "Disabled Americans must become full partners in Americans' opportunity and society." He also stated, "Much is being done to normalize life for those now retarded and to reduce the future occurrence of retardation."
Laws sometimes give people an excuse to then do the right thing when it might not be easy to do that right thing without that incentive. But then I'd like to think in many cases with the success of the treatments we have nowadays that it pays off for them in the long run as well.
After the creation of President Nixon's new committee, President George H.W. Bush created the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, in 1990. President Bush said, "We will not tolerate discrimination in America." These acts and committees throughout history made society take on a responsibility to treat people suffering from mental disabilities with respect, ensure fair treatment, and help to educate the general public about these people and their disabilities.
Don't act like it's a stigma or assume that they feel stigmatized, but let them teach you. I think many people are going to be open and upfront in this day and age about educating people about the challenges they face rather than trying to hide it.
It is also the responsibility of societal members to ensure fair education for any persons with a mental disability.
The responsibilities that we've put on teachers is that we continue to work with these kids and try to educate everyone around us that yes, they may have a weakness in this area, they may have a quote disability, but they still can be very productive members of society.
Another responsibility of society is to find new ways to treat and prevent mental disabilities. Dr. Geed, a researcher for a child psychiatric department, conducted a psychological study on mental retardation to attempt to find its cause and a cure. He hypothesized that genes can affect the development of brain disorders. His study showed a majority of patients suffering from mental retardation and other mental disabilities had a family member, even as distant as great-grandparents, who suffered a mental disability themselves.
The more we learn about diseases of the brain and mental illnesses, we see more of a connection with the biology of the brain and how the brain cells connect with each other and communicate, and things we just couldn't have known back in the early part of the 1900s or earlier. We just didn't have the technology to tell that. And the medicines now that we've used for the last 60 years or so, to varying degrees, set those connections back into balance.
America has experienced many changes throughout its brief history. The rights of people with disabilities have been one of the biggest changes. These people who were once seen as cursed and unwanted in the beginning of time have come to be the people who experience the same rights as everyday American citizens. They are no longer locked away in harmful asylums, but are integrated into an average American lifestyle. These rights have led society to take on certain responsibilities. Responsibilities to take care of the people who have mental disabilities, to find new forms of treatment, and to find a cure for the most notorious mental disabilities. As this revolution continues to progress, we, as Americans, can truly say we are one step closer to following the rights placed in our Constitution. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain, unalienable rights.